Paul sees it everywhere. Instagram, TikTok, Reddit threads with thousands of upvotes. No buy 2026. Everyone's doing it. Or saying they're doing it. The concept is simple. Stop buying things you don't need for an entire year. No new clothes. No eating out. No impulse purchases. No subscriptions you don't use. Just essentials. Just discipline. Just finally getting control. Paul reads the testimonials. People saving thousands. People feeling free. People breaking the cycle of mindless consumption. It sounds extreme, but Paul's tried moderate. Moderate hasn't worked. Maybe extreme is what he needs, so Paul commits. January 1st, no buy 2026. He posts about it, gets likes, gets encouragement, gets that feeling of finally doing something real. And for 3 weeks, Paul is winning. Week 1 is easy, surprisingly easy. Paul says no to everything. Coffee shop? No. Lunch out? No. That thing on Amazon? Absolutely not. Every no feels like progress. Like Paul is finally in control of something. He checks his bank account more often, watching the number stay steady, even go up slightly. This is working. Paul feels lighter, not because he's saving massive amounts yet, but because he's not bleeding. For the first time in months, money isn't disappearing. It's just there. Week 2, Paul starts calculating. If he keeps this up all year, he'll save thousands, maybe 10,000, maybe more. He could pay off debt, build an emergency fund, actually invest, finally get ahead. The math is intoxicating. Week 3, Paul tells his friends. They're impressed. Some are skeptical. For a whole year? Really? But Paul is confident. He's already 3 weeks in. He's got momentum. He's got rules. He's got clarity. This isn't a diet. This is a lifestyle change. Paul genuinely believes this. For exactly 4 more days. Paul's coworkers are going to lunch. They invite him. Paul says no. He's doing no buy. They nod. They go without him. Paul eats his packed lunch at his desk. Alone. It's fine. He's saving money, that's the point. But it doesn't feel good. It feels isolating. The next week, there's a birthday dinner. For someone Paul likes, someone who invited him specifically. Paul says no again. Explains the no-buy thing. They understand, sort of. But Paul sees the look. The okay, weird, but whatever look. Paul stays home, saves money, feels virtuous, and lonely. Then Paul's shoes fall apart. Not worn out, actually broken. Sole separating from the leather. Paul needs new shoes. That's essential, right? That's allowed. But Paul spent 45 minutes researching the cheapest option, comparing prices, reading reviews, agonizing over $20 differences. He buys the shoes, but the process was exhausting and expensive because shoes aren't cheap, even the budget ones. Paul's no-buy budget just took a $70 hit for something essential, something unavoidable, something that doesn't feel like cheating but also doesn't feel like winning. Then his niece's birthday comes up. Paul can't show up empty-handed. That's not an option. So he buys a gift, $30. Another exception, another crack in the system. Paul tells himself these don't count. These are necessary. But necessary is expensive, and it's only week 4. Paul stopped buying coffee, stopped eating out, stopped all the small stuff, and saved maybe $400 in 3 weeks. That's good. That's real money. But Paul's rent is still $1,800. His car payment is still $350. Insurance is still $200. Phone bill is still $80. Internet is still $70. Student loan payment is still $280. Those don't stop. Those don't care about no-buy. Paul eliminated the variable expenses, the ones he could control, but the fixed expenses, the ones that actually matter, are still there, still heavy, still eating most of his paycheck before he even thinks about discretionary spending. No-buy made Paul feel productive, like he was finally addressing the problem. But the problem isn't the $5 coffees. It's that Paul's baseline cost of living is $3,200 a month. And he makes $70,000 a year, which is $4,300 a month after taxes. That leaves Paul $1,100 for everything else. Groceries, gas, utilities, everything variable. Before no-buy, Paul was spending about $1,400 on variables. He was $300 in the hole every month. Not because of reckless spending, because his fixed costs are too high. No-buy didn't fix that. It just made Paul more aware of how little room he has, and awareness without options is just stress. It's Friday. Paul had a terrible week at work. Everything went wrong. Deadlines missed. Boss annoyed. Co-worker passive-aggressive. Paul is exhausted, burned out, done. He drives past his usual takeout place. He hasn't been there in a month. Paul thinks about going home, cooking something, sticking to the plan, but he's so tired, and he's been so disciplined. And it's just one meal, one exception. He's earned it. Paul orders $18. It tastes amazing. Not because the food is special, because Paul hasn't had it in weeks. Because deprivation makes everything taste better. Paul feels good, then guilty, then defiant. He's been perfect for a month. One slip doesn't erase that, except the next day Paul does it again, and the day after that, and suddenly no-buy is over. Not officially. Paul doesn't announce it. He just stops following the rules. Because the rules were exhausting, and Paul is tired. Not just physically, emotionally. Tired of saying no. Tired of being the person who can't do normal things. Tired of optimizing every decision. Tired of living like he's in crisis when he's not in crisis. He's just broke. And no-buy didn't fix that. It just made being broke more obvious. Paul spent a month saying no to everything. Now he's saying yes to too much. New shoes. But not the budget ones this time. The ones he actually wanted. $120. Dinner out. 3 times this week. The subscription he canceled? Back on. Paul isn't being reckless. He's compensating. For a month of deprivation, for feeling restricted, for saying no when everyone else was saying yes. This is what crash diets do. Financial or otherwise, restrict too hard, too fast, and eventually you snap. The snap isn't failure. It's biology. It's psychology. It's human. Paul restricted without addressing why he needed to restrict in the first place. He treated the symptoms, not the structure. And now he's back where he started. Actually worse. Because now Paul feels like he failed, like he doesn't have discipline, like he can't even do something as simple as just stop spending. But it wasn't simple. It was unsustainable. And unsustainable always breaks. The only question is when. No-buy is popular for a reason. It's clear, it's dramatic, it's shareable. You can post about it, track it, get encouragement, feel like part of a movement. Moderate doesn't go viral. I'm being slightly more intentional with spending doesn't get likes. I'm doing no-buy 2026 does. Because extreme is interesting. Extreme feels serious. Extreme feels like you're finally doing something real. And for people who feel out of control with money, extreme feels necessary. Paul felt that way. Like moderate had failed him. Like he needed something bigger, something total, something that would force change. But extreme only works if the problem is behavior. If Paul was spending recklessly, no-buy would help. It would reveal the habits, interrupt the patterns, create awareness. But Paul wasn't reckless. He was squeezed. His fixed costs are too high for his income. His variable spending was just normal. Not excessive, not wasteful, just normal. And no-buy punished normal. It made Paul feel like normal was the problem, when the real problem is that normal is expensive, and Paul's income hasn't kept up. No-buy assumes Paul has margin, room to cut, fat to trim. But Paul doesn't have fat. He has bone. His rent is market rate. His car payment is what it is. His insurance is mandatory. His student loans aren't negotiable. None of that gets smaller during no-buy. Paul cut the $400 of variable spending. The coffee, the lunches, the small stuff. But that $400 was the release valve, the thing that made the pressure bearable. The occasional meal out wasn't waste. It was maintenance, social connection, mental relief, a reminder that life isn't just survival. No-buy removed that and told Paul he'd feel better. He didn't. He felt deprived, and deprivation doesn't build wealth, it builds resentment. What Paul actually needed was a foundation, an emergency fund so car repairs don't cause panic, lower fixed costs so he has room to breathe, Higher income so normal expenses don't drain him. A plan that's sustainable for years, not weeks. Nobody gave Paul rules. What he needed was structure, and structure takes longer than a month. It's boring. It's not shareable. It doesn't trend, but it works. Paul sees the success stories. People who saved $15,000 during their no-buy year. People who paid off debt. People who completely transformed their finances. It's real. For some people it works. But those people aren't Paul. They're people who were overspending, actually overspending. $500 a month on takeout, $300 a month on clothes they don't wear, subscriptions they forgot about, impulse purchases that added up. For them, no-buy is a reset, a way to interrupt genuinely bad habits, to see how much was unnecessary, to build awareness and discipline. Paul doesn't have bad habits. He has a structural problem. His fixed costs are too high. His income is too low. His margin is too thin. No-buy can't fix structure. It can only reveal behavior. And Paul's behavior wasn't the issue. But when Paul sees those success stories, he doesn't think about the difference. He thinks he failed. He thinks he's weak. He thinks if he just tried harder, it would work for him too. But trying harder at the wrong solution doesn't create better results. It just creates more exhaustion. Paul doesn't need no-buy. He needs a budget, not a restriction, a plan, a realistic understanding of where his money goes and why. Paul needs to know that his rent is 42% of his take-home, that his car payment could be $150 less if he'd bought used, that his subscriptions add up to $80 a month for things he rarely uses. He needs to see the fixed costs for what they are, too high, and make actual decisions about them. Maybe Paul needs a roommate. Maybe he needs to move somewhere cheaper. Maybe he needs to sell the car and buy something older. Maybe he needs to ask for a raise or find a better paying job. These aren't fun solutions. They're not viral. They don't feel empowering in the moment, but they're structural, and structure is what Paul actually needs. Cutting coffee doesn't fix a rent problem. Skipping lunch doesn't fix a car payment problem. No-buy treats discretionary spending like it's the enemy, when the real enemy is fixed costs that don't leave room for life. Paul also needs an emergency fund, not a big one, just $1,000 to start, so the next time something breaks, he doesn't panic, doesn't spiral, doesn't feel like he's failing. That $1,000 doesn't come from no-buy extremes. It comes from small, consistent choices, over time, boring, slow, sustainable. This isn't Paul's first time trying something extreme. Last year, it was a different challenge. Same energy, same commitment, same collapse. Paul keeps looking for the one thing that will fix everything, the dramatic change, the total reset, the extreme discipline that will finally make him financially stable. But money doesn't work that way. Money responds to consistency, not intensity. Doing something sustainable for a year beats doing something extreme for a month. Every time. Paul saves $400 during no-buy January, then spends $600 in February compensating. Net result, negative. If Paul had just budgeted normally, he'd be better off. But normal feels weak. Normal feels like he's not trying hard enough. So Paul keeps reaching for extreme, and extreme keeps failing him. Not because Paul is weak, because extreme isn't designed to last. It's designed to feel significant, and feeling significant isn't the same as being effective. Paul will probably try another challenge next year, another viral trend, another promise of transformation, until Paul realizes the truth. Transformation doesn't come from one big decision. It comes from 100 small ones, repeated, consistently, boringly, for years. Paul's no-buy year lasted 3 weeks, not because he's undisciplined, because no-buy wasn't solving his actual problem. It was masking it, making him feel productive while the foundation stayed broken. Paul doesn't need to stop buying things. He needs to fix the structure, lower his fixed costs, build an emergency fund, increase his income, create actual margin. Then, and only then, will cutting discretionary spending matter. Because then it's optimization, not desperation. No-buy works when you have fat to cut. Paul doesn't have fat. He has a system that's too tight, and tightening it further doesn't create slack. It creates breaking points. Paul sees that now. Sort of. He's still tempted by the next trend, the next challenge, The next dramatic commitment that promises change, because dramatic feels like progress, even when it isn't. But maybe this time, Paul will try something different, something boring, something sustainable, something that doesn't go viral, but actually works. Maybe. Paul isn't doing no buy anymore. He's not announcing that. He's just living, trying to be intentional, trying to make better choices, trying to build something that lasts longer than a month. It's not exciting. It's not shareable. It doesn't get likes, but it might actually work, and that's worth more than any trend. Thanks for watching. We'll check back in on Paul next time. Another trap, another lesson. This is how money really works.